Joe, it is awesome to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, Mike. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're going to have a pretty good conversation. We met through Pavilion, which is one of the community groups that we're a part of. And we happen to be part of a couple of different community groups that are out there, which is, I think, kind of a cool thing to see. There are a number of us who get involved in these communities. We want to give back. We want to engage. We want to learn. We know that there's a way to continue to grow better, do better, impact better. So why do you get involved in community?
To be honest, once COVID was ending and things were settling and we're trying to get back into place, there weren't really as many in-person opportunities to connect.
Yeah.
And it was becoming very challenging. But for professional and personal reasons, I think it's really good to keep up the conversation, right? When you stay in your silo, you block yourself off from having new ideas, new kind of back and forth. So you become a little stale. I didn't want that to happen. So start searching. Pavilion was one of the first groups I found. It was not named Pavilion at that time. It was Operators Collective, but Pavilion is a newer name for it, so that's cool. And it's really just about finding those who like to have same conversations, but different subjects, different disciplines, different markets, different countries. And it's almost like a smorgasbord, right? You can go out there, you have tens of thousands of people in some of these groups. Maybe one month you're quiet, you don't say a thing. Maybe the next month you're very active. Maybe someone finds you, you find them. But you just have the ability to communicate with almost whoever you want, whenever you want, on whatever subject you want to do, and the same in reverse. So they can help you, you can help them. That really can't happen at a networking event. I mean, it's almost impossible. So not that in-person events should end. I think there should be more of them. But it's a nice asynchronous way for people to communicate and continue to grow together. That was a much longer answer than I intended to give.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And what was interesting about your answer is I know it as the Revenue Collective. So you know it as the Operator Collective. I know it's the Revenue Collective. It started as the Revenue Collective way back when Sam originally launched the business. I forget if he was like a 2017 or 2018 type thing. I first got involved in 2019, and it's been a great group to be a part of. And it through the iterations and growth, you now have founders in there. So there are founders, there are CEOs, there are COOs, there are CROs, there are associates. So people who've moved into their first leadership role in each of these areas. And it becomes a really good place to stay grounded relative to the types of questions that come up and make you rethink some of those questions, or at least make me rethink some of those questions. And it provides an opportunity to help others move along. One of the greatest values I get out of participating in Pavilion is the opportunity to mentor folks and mentor people who want to move into a CRO type role, or at least think they want to move into a CRO type role. And it's a pretty awesome group. So it's great to meet you through that group.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the connection between operations and sales, or operations and revenue, just to kind of jump into this leadership from a COO and a CRO perspective. Why is it important for the COO and the CRO to work well with each other?
I think it's more for the COO to work well with everybody, right? We are the glue between all different teams in the company. So I think certainly the amicability of the individual and the team is certainly foremost and a paramount concern. But specifically for the COO and the CRO, is at the end of the day, a business is typically in business to sell stuff, right? Like we have to sell something to keep the doors open. And the salespeople are out there, they're doing what they have to do. But once they get the connection to purchase an item or a service, all those back end things have to happen, right? It's got to be papers and contracts and plans and processes and delivery and schedules and all the stuff that really doesn't make the sales process very fun. So how do we automate? How do we streamline? How do we remove roadblocks? How do we, decrease the length of the deal cycle? That's all on the ops side. Whether it's revenue ops or sales ops or deal desk, whatever the company plans on calling it that quarter, it's an ops related type function, right? We don't really, care what it's called at that time. So getting on the same page, what do you need to be successful? Where are your pain points? What kind of challenges do you see? Is this quote too wordy? Is this data sheet not looking right? Are you not enabled properly? Having those conversations allows the salesperson to keep on doing what they're doing. They kind of, share the details with you. Then you go back, on a different time zone, and you kind of go there and you figure things out. You make the connections, you do the handshakes, and you see what you need to do to move the business forward. So I think you work very well together.
What's the COO's primary function?
That's funny. I was actually watching a video from another COO who had their own definition, and I think there's multiple. So in one way, the COO is supposed to be there to allow the CEO to do their vision and their dreaming, right? To eliminate them from the day to day, to allow the CEO to go and shine while you figure out how to make the stuff work, right? Make the trains run on time, put all the building blocks together, make the puzzle look pretty. That's one function. The other is, I think, just to figure out how to get those things done that don't have a name associated with it, right? So when you have, issue A pops up in the company and they say, who should do issue A? And you can't align that to any department, it's almost like the default is, well, we'll just put it to ops. It's like the kitchen sink, we'll just throw it in there. So essentially we just get stuff done. We work with others to make things happen.
That is, if there's one takeaway to come from away from this conversation, lean on your COO and the people within their team to get things done. Like, they just get things done. They're operators. They know how to move things from point A to point B, and then C, and then D, and then E, and then we finally get to Z. And instead of some of us trying to just jump from A to Z and not knowing how all of it goes together. I think so. Let's talk about the challenges between the CEO or not the CEO, the COO and the CRO. Where have you seen a relationship between a COO and a revenue leader fracture?
I think if you go by the definition of a COO in terms of people, process, technology, and you focus a bit more on the process than the people, right? That can create a potential for some friction, right? So if you're all about, look, we can't let this deal go through because you didn't exactly follow these steps, you didn't exactly follow the process, so my Salesforce data isn't exactly as pretty and clean and sweet smelling as I'd hope it to be, that's going to create a problem. So in some cases, you have to move the business forward, make everybody happy, but make a mark on the note. We have to fix this, clean this up, touch that. But at the end of the day, you want to move the client forward. So as long as you're not violating any kind of compliance, any kind of legality, you're covering yourself, you're covering them, the paperwork is clean. Some of the other things can be cleaned up. Now, if it's a repeated offense, you repeatedly see the same, let's say, a fraction occur, that's a different story. Let's retrain, let's talk. But you have to be flexible while also ensuring you're maintaining the compliance and orderliness of the business.
Have you been in organizations where maybe a VP of sales rolls up into the COO role, or even a CRO rolls up into a COO role?
I have not yet.
There's a period of time when I was at a company, Skillsoft was the company, and sales team reported into the COO inside that organization. And I forget if we did the same at Aurilia for a short period of time, but before people had talked about the CRO type role. I think that happened periodically. It's interesting to see this whole evolution. I really like how you were talking through there. You threw out deal desk, and you threw out RevOps, and you threw out BizOps, or all of these. We've got all of these things, whatever we're calling it, over a period of time. How long have these functions existed? How long has the operation function existed inside organizations?
That's funny. I did a webinar earlier this year, and I actually did a little research, and I was thinking back, and I was trying to be cute with a little slide there. And I was like, the Rolodex was essentially an operations function, right? We try to automate the collection of contacts for business partners to have a conversation. I mean, so the minute you had business, the minute you tried to do something in a repeatable fashion, you kind of had operations.
So anybody who's out there pitching some new language or new name associated with each of these things, stop trying to be a category creator, market creator, etc. There's nothing new except what has been forgotten, which is one of my favorite quotes. That's a Marie Antoinette one for anybody who is not familiar with it.
It is. I'm just thinking of it this way. And every time we change a name of what we do, everyone's got to update their LinkedIn backgrounds, right? What you did is no longer a algorithmically friendly search term.
It creates so much confusion, because then some investor or some member of the board comes in and says, I've been reading this thing about whatever. Or they might not even say I've been reading. They might just come in and say, what's our RevOps strategy? Or what's our GTM team function or strategy? And it ends up slowing things down in the organization. Do you agree with that? Like, have you seen that? Have you seen the slowdown come up with some of the confusion?
I've definitely seen him using some of the more modern terms, creating friction. I've definitely seen that. And what I've seen that is not just to, let's say, throw the term across the fence. You got to give it some love along the way, right? So I would like to create a team of name X because of the following reasons. I can attract new talent better. People will understand the position better. They'll understand how to collaborate better. I can be more attracted to different vendors who want to come in and help me facilitate this collaboration. So I think, in some ways, operations also has to do the sales and marketing, right? We want to do categorically different shifts in a business, but we can't just say, go do this, right? No one's going to believe that. You have to sell it at the same time and you have to market it at the same time. So instead of just throwing across, oh, I have this new GTM function, or I want to create a RevOps team, or I want to create this, seismic shift in automation. Why? What is the real result? What changes? What's better? What's worse? Where does headcount go? I think those things all go back to the basics of running a business and allow people to see the result and then kind of ignore the fact that it's a new name.
So let's work through that. What are the basics in operating a business? Basic functions.
This is only like a 30-minute podcast, right?
Keep it short.
Sure. To me, the basics of operating a business is, you have the visionary, usually the CEO, they want to create a vision, they have a plan of a product or a service. But then there's all those things underneath that they have to make that happen. So in these days and age, it's much more difficult than decades ago. You have heavy compliance, legality, AI concerns, people concerns. So you have to sort of check the boxes on this litany of things to keep your doors open and running, besides just paying your taxes, that have absolutely nothing to do with your core product or service. So it's almost like 10% of your time is on the vision you have, and 90% of the time is just making all the other authorities happy so you can proceed. So the running the business part is really ensuring that all those, I call it pipes and plumbing. Every business has to have them. All the pipes and plumbing is there and working and functioning. And then you're adding on the unique aspects specific to you, similar to Salesforce, right? We all have Salesforce. It's the same thing as pipes and plumbing. Mine looks different than yours. Yours looks different than hers. We customize the inside. So you've all got the same kind of requirements of what you got to do. Then you put your customization layer on top of it. And at the end of the day, oh yeah, I sell a different product than you. But you all got those base layers.
I think that's a fascinating way to look at it, in the whole kind of like house metaphor or building metaphor, or could be an entire community metaphor, as you start to look at how the business is growing and what are the foundational pieces that you need, functional pipes and plumbing, and how does information flow inside the organization? How do people flow inside the organization? How do customers flow inside the organization? That plumbing piece is a really, really cool way to look at it. What do you think's new in the ops space? Like, what are you excited about in this whole operations space that kind of gets you saying, hey, I think we're starting to move in the right direction?
I think part of it is just the fact that the concept of operations is kind of getting a little more traction these days, right? You're able to talk about it a little more openly, able to have a conversation around it. So whereas some entities might have been trying to do different things, but didn't know how to couch the concept or the idea, or didn't know who to get or how to do it, we're starting to verbalize that a lot more and trying to create our own patterns and processes. So if you look at, let's say, sales motions, right? You can go back decades and find repeatedly sales motions, ways to do things. These that are common and they're practiced. Financing, same thing. If you look at operations or, our new friend RevOps, they didn't exist. But groups like Pavilion, the GTM consortium, they're all trying to create these automations, these processes, then level up the pipes and plumbing for all, companies going forward. And I continue to use that like the construction metaphors as you pick, because I also have a construction background. So I kind of pull that in, and I think people relate to it just much better, right? Everyone knows what pipes are, plumbing, house, structures. It just commonalizes the complexity of the situation.
Yeah, I was on a Demand Base, a podcast with Nick Capozzi, and that was one of the times when I started like socializing the revenue plumber concept, and it was all around the idea of, when do you need to have a plumber? So, open question: when do you need to have a plumber?
A long answer again, I can give for that. I mean, to me, we'll use Salesforce as an example again.
Yeah.
I like to have my team, my team of Salesforce admins, be polite and friendly, but to also stand in front of Salesforce with a bat. And anytime someone decides to do something naughty, they have to politely use the bat and say, please, let's modify that, because you have to protect the data, right? You talk about boards and governance and reporting and complications. We have to be able to use that data to create intelligence, to create answers and dashboards. If the data is dirty, the prettiest pie chart in the world doesn't mean anything. And it all starts with the data. So the revenue plumber is essentially there to make sure that the data is correct. So when you call on it, you'll actually trust it.
Yeah. So, and Joe jumped ahead. Like he went through from an ops perspective, he just could see it immediately. You need to have that person in place beforehand, because as you continue to add more components, more pieces of flow, more information into the system, it's going to be much harder to manage the systems and process type stuff. Typically when I ask that question, there's someone will say, hey, when the crap's all over the place, when the shit is just all over the place, that's when you need.
It's too late.
When would you have wanted to have it? And Joe, given his ops background, is already into, you need to have that person early. You really would have wanted to have that person in there early, because you can get those systems and processes taking place. I think another takeaway from this conversation is make sure that you spend time with your COO, with the people on your COO's team. Ask for help. Let them know what you're struggling with. They might actually be able to look at some of the things that you're working through and be really quick on helping with some of the system design type stuff. Is that fair?
Yes. I mean, I like, again, I mean, a little partial to the ops side, I guess, but I like to think that we should be involved every time there could be a question of who you should include, right? I'm not sure if I have all the right teams. I'm not sure if I'm missing something. Bring us in there to be the polite person sitting in the corner saying, yeah, no, product should have been here too, or yeah, no, this could be an insurance thing, or legal's going to hate us. Just to be able to kind of put those pieces together. And I say that more cautiously, and I know this really applies more to, larger companies, or those who have funding and that type of activity, but we live in a very legal and compliance laden world. So even the simplest and most mundane type of activities could have a complication that might prevent you from getting funding in the future, prevent you from having a due diligence that doesn't make you cry. So trying to prevent those things in the beginning is ideal, but also it takes a team or a leadership team that is willing to look at these as not being people who are whining or upset or just want things to be perfect, but they're looking at it to prevent the risks that prevent you from getting what you want to happen, right? So we're really trying to make your dream come true, but sometimes there's a lot of pain along the way to make that happen.
I think it's awesome that you talked about being the nice person in the room just a couple of minutes after you talked about having a bat.
As I said, it's a kitchen sink. Sometimes it's dirty, sometimes it's clean. It really depends on the afternoon.
Well, as you're going through this, you bring up another key role, specifically around risk, like the CFO. And you start to think about, okay, well, how do we interact between revenue, ops, and finance? Can you talk a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the early comment where I think the COO position has to be friendly with everybody, right? I mean, we should be friendly just in general, but professionally, it's kind of an obligation. In some communities, you actually see the COO and CFO communities merge because of the similarities, because you're working on the finances, the risk. I think that their positions overlap in many ways from a conversational point of view when it comes to, let's say, procurement, expense management, compliance, reporting, auditing. All those things have relationships. So if you look at a typical finance team, they may not be officially as technically pervasive, so to speak, right? Whereas an ops team is typically very technical. So marrying those two together allows them to look at how do we automate this? How do we allow as you're saying, the revenue plumbing to extend to the finance systems? How do we ease your life for better reporting, for better throughput? So I think those are ways that we work well together.
I think this is one of the cool parts about this challenge of everybody kind of getting in and creating some of these new categories. So as someone comes in and starts talking about RevOps or GTM functions, and then the awesome one, and I want to get into this here in just a little bit. So this is foreshadowing, but the whole seat at the table discussion about how now everybody wants a seat at the table. But when you bring in each of these individual functions, one of the cool things that's happening is more people have access to those functions, which means a chance for that to be a path for growth. So a CRO or a VP of sales could move into a COO role, or a CPO, a chief product officer role. A COO could find some interest in being on the financial side, move into a CFO side of things. A CFO could move into a COO role. And then everybody starts kind of moving around the C-suite. And as we move around the C-suite, We get a better understanding of how the functional roles work inside the organization. And now we'll create better CEOs inside the business. Is that fair?
Think it's very fair. I think that part of the responsibility or the remit of any C-level individual is to have a decent percentage of understanding of the other roles at the table. So that way you can collaborate better together. So you can minimize conversations that don't really count. And so you can also cover each other, right? Everyone's not going to always be here all the time. So be able to allow decision making to be more seamless, to be able to allow things to fit together better as a puzzle shape, so to speak. I think it's really key to understand where the other person's coming from, what makes them tick, what makes their role positive, what reaches the goals together. And the only way to do that is to not be individual silos, to not have walls between each particular function, but to work collaboratively and ideally, hand waving. That will make the CEO's team stronger, will make everyone kind of have more visibility. And on the visibility part, as they're saying, and everyone to see at the table, nowadays with the way information is produced, let's say the free flowing of data, how easily it is to access things. People can ask more questions, teams across the enterprise, regardless of their particular title or elevation in the company, know more things. So it's best to be honest, to have a good deal of collaboration to ensure that the path is clear, because to me, when you foggy the path, right, when your plumbing gets to have some some fat chunks on the side, so to speak, things get really wonky and confusing, and you don't want those words in your team pipeline.
No, you do not. So let's talk about we spent a lot of time at the executive level here and functional areas at the top inside organizations. One of the groups that you highlighted as you went through the COO perspective, and this happens in the consulting space as well. You look at things in the context of people, technology, process, or people, systems, and process. Like however you define each of those. But let's go people, technology, process. On the people, technology, process side of things, let's talk a bit about people. How do we enable our people at the front line to operate better inside the organization?
I think a few things. I mean, one, regardless of your role in the company, you have to know what you're selling. You have to have good training up front. It's not just your sales team that you need to enable. Your entire team needs to be able to go to a street corner, talk to someone and say exactly what you do as a company. And in 5 seconds flat, the other person understands it. If you've not achieved that yet, perhaps your sales pitch might be a little off, right? Perhaps the way you're going to market, the way you're explaining yourself might be a little bit too complicated. If everyone knows the reason that they're and what they're doing, one, it just eliminates a lot of questions, a lot of hesitation. That's positive. The second is, what are the goals? Are the goals clear? We all talk about OKRs and KPIs and metrics, and they're really fancy acronyms that have a lot of weight behind them, and they are important in their day, so to speak. But all that aside, all the fancy nomenclature there, if everyone in the team and their structure doesn't really know what they need to do as a company to be successful and individually as a team, and if it doesn't all roll up together, then we're all running in different directions, right? It's like running a 5K, but everyone went down a different parkway. So it gets very confusing.
It sounds like you're talking about the importance of alignment.
Yes, that is also a simpler way to put it.
So yeah, so let's go deep in that. Why do organizations struggle with alignment?
I think, even with organizations that have, let's say, skip level meetings and multi-departmental meetings, decisions are usually made at a certain group together, right? And in that group, you get the group think, you get the nodding from your peers, and that, adds the belief that you are correct and you can push things forward. But then you might be so busy, you might not realize that you just made 20 other decisions last week that you just entirely conflicted. So unless you're looking down at the entire, let's say, multiple levels of umbrellas in the organization, you can literally be saying, paint the wall red today, and then tomorrow being like, no, I told you it was white. And it doesn't make any sense. So someone at a different level is looking at it and saying, wow, these guys have no clue. And it gets very confusing. So I think that that's a lot of that can happen, especially as you grow. And kind of staying aligned to what is the mission, what are the goals, are we communicating properly, do people know where their place is and their responsibilities and what we're doing together to make the engine seamless. If that's not there, if that alignment is let's say, shoddy, so to speak, you can have a lot of double talk and misdirection, and it gets confusing.
You mean that there are times when leaders are in meetings and they nod yes in affirmation of something when they don't really understand what was actually said over the past 30 seconds to 90 seconds?
That's why you got to get everything in writing.
It really helps. Like if you have a structure around around, keeping notes and organizing information and sharing information both up and down the organization, throughout the organization. Take, culture of transparency that can really help drive this alignment piece. And the cool thing that happens, I think, when organizations are really open about it, open about what the objectives are, open about why those are the objectives, then when things come down, shiny things come up in the organization, then the people on the front line can start to ask questions, and they can push back and say, how does this actually align with this thing that we said we're doing, whether it's the red wall or the white wall? How does this align? What do you think?
I think that's true. I think though, it's more than just putting that alignment and goals together, and it is usually a multi-year journey for companies to get into, but you have to also live it. You have to breathe it. So are you having those goal alignment meetings often? Are you ensuring you're there? Are you ensuring you're applying some common metric to the decision-making process? Because it's very easy for one individual or group of individuals at a certain level to decide to just kind of take that entire process and move it in the wrong direction. And then the whole house of cards falls. So, can we kind of contractually agree as a company to follow this decision making, that we will make this change if these three things align, and that somehow we all know there's only X hours in a week. And if we need to do 5 times as much, we need to kind of figure out a people situation. You got to take all those elements together. Time just doesn't multiply by itself.
What's the right frequency to do this stuff?
I think if you were starting from scratch, thinking about your goals for next year would probably happen at least early in the fourth quarter. You're going to need at least 3 months by the time you just have the time to have the meetings, discuss things, document, put things together. I think you'd want to have it as an executive team. You're probably looking at that stuff at least, briefly, monthly, heavily, quarterly. You're going to roll up that. So those, if you use a more advanced PM system, so to speak, your departmental goals can roll up to your company level goals. You can do your individual goals. If you're very religious, and I mean very religious on it, then you can eliminate a lot of work. But it takes everyone to buy in. You can't have that team that says, you know what, doing tasks isn't for me, or I'm not into goals, I can't do this. The minute one team decides to bow out, the whole house of cards kind of breaks.
So you mentioned a couple of different systems. You mentioned OKRs. What type of systems do you like? What system have you adopted to help manage this? What system do you prefer to help manage this?
I mean, I think depending on the organization, depends on the maturity, the size, the skills of the team. I think at simplest form, you're just basically tiering tasks that have certain outcomes associated with it. So if the company has these 5 major things they want to do in that year, maybe each of those things turns out to be 20 individualized projects. Maybe each of those projects turns out to be 100 individualized tasks. So you start to see that hierarchy kind of forming, all aligning together. Whether you want to call that goals or OKRs or KPIs or EOS or whatever other acronym you want to give it to, it's all the same thing at the end of the day, right? Tasks that roll up to projects that roll up to goals that roll up to everyone's happy.
Yeah. And I think that is, at least in my experience, I've seen people struggle with this. They struggle, organizations struggle with it, especially when you bring in new leaders into an organization, or you hire really quickly, or you lose a key leader inside the organization. That's where you see this kind of misalignment, and it happens over and over again. Any thoughts on why? Well, actually, is that your experience? Do you see that happen?
I think it does kind of go back to the highest decision makers needing to follow a methodology of wanting the goals to be achievable, right? So I like to use this, a philosophy like the shiny ball methodology, right? And I've seen lots of product teams do that as well. You can't be attracted by every shiny thing that comes along your way. You have to evaluate it and understand, is that beneficial to the business? Can I do it? Can I do it in my current workload? Do I have to change something? You can't just keep adding on things over and over. So if there's any of that philosophy in the entity, it's kind of bound to be a really rocky road. And that's where things start to kind of fall apart. So you all have to be aligned on really wanting those goals to accomplish. It means there's ramifications. Those goals should be such that if those goals are not done at the end of the year, your board is pissed, rightfully so. Because if they're not pissed, then were those the goals you should be doing? Because if someone's not upset for those goals failing, then they're probably not goals. I mean, no offense, but someone should be upset if they're not done, because they should be really important.
Yes. Like, and I mean, just put an exclamation point on that piece or a bow around it. Like this is not an exercise where you can go out and just tell a team, okay, everybody go out and design your OKRs, and then we'll go ahead and we'll see, you'll have you work on it and then provide updates and all of this other kind of stuff. I think that's when I've seen OKRs rolled out incorrectly inside organizations. It's typically because somebody heard somebody on a podcast talk about it. Somebody read something in a Slack channel about it. Somebody read a blog about it, and they said, okay, we're going to go ahead and roll out OKRs. And they didn't actually go in and read Doer's book. And in Doer's book, one of the things that he highlights is the importance of the leadership team adopting the method, like Joe's talking about, adopting the method for a 6-month period before rolling it out to the rest of the team. Like, you've got to be aligned as a leadership perspective. If not, what ends up happening is that you get a lot of frustrated people out in the field doing work, what they think is meaningful work. And then when they report back up, they're either getting caught up in a series of reporting on a bunch of activities, but not actually making progress toward the goal of the organization, or they end up getting pushback from the leadership around, like, why are you doing that? And once that pushback comes up and people push back on the questions, now you're starting to create this culture inside your organization of don't ask questions, just do your job. And that is not a fun place to work. Joe?
Yeah, you're adding a lot of questions that can be go there. I mean, go back to the revenue plumber, for example. So, you can have data in the system that's wrong, but you can produce the most attractive spreadsheets possible. No value at the end. You can say you want to do OKRs or goals, or again, any name you want to give it to. And every team can produce this list of goals, this list of items, and you can bless it and say, this is our goals for the year. We're all good. But you are unwilling to take the time to weave those departments together, weave the goals together, see if they make sense. And then if every week you decide that I've got 5 new goals, I'm going to ignore the other ones, and you never collaboratively bring them together, right? It's just really fancy paperwork that doesn't get completed. And then you wonder, what was the effort that you spent on it?
Joe, you're giving me more gray hair and making me lose hair as we're talking through it, because it seems so straightforward and simple, yet I know organizations struggle with it. Would you say, is it typical that organizations struggle with it, or are there a lot of organizations that just are really doing this whole thing so well? And if there are ones that are doing it really well, how do you find those companies that are doing it really, really well?
I mean, if you go back to the community aspect again, there are communities that literally just focus on OKRs and qualitative analysis and just discuss, all those who are doing that correctly. I think it goes also back to the people aspect, right? You have people in organizations. People are not robots. They're not machines. They're not able to do things exactly the same way all the time. So as long as people exist, we're always going to have this variation and culture. So, are we allowing ourselves the time to breathe, to create these goals? Or do we have a number on our heads that means meet the number? It doesn't matter about the rest of the things. You can't do everything at once. Maybe you, unfortunately, and I might definitely get dinged for this one, maybe you need to have a slower year so you could have an excellent decade. It's a really hard concept. People might be very upset by that statement. But what is a phenomenal year, but then you don't live a decade? So it's something to think about.
Why do people struggle with thinking about it in that context?
The reward system or the goals that one might think are important may not always be long-term, or short-term could be an acceptable goal that could be totally legit, but the rest of the company might not know about it. And then you have misalignment. So you might not be incorrect in the fact of desiring a short-term goal that ignores these other elements, but everyone needs to be on the same page.
Know what game you're playing as you go through this. Like, that is the theme of, at least of this part of the conversation, is know the game you're playing, at least be aligned on it. Because sometimes, and I've been inside organizations thinking I'm playing hockey, and the rest of the team thought we were playing football. And it just, and some of those people thought we were playing football in the NFL, and some thought we were playing in the British Premier League. Like, there's these challenges that end up happening, even when we use the same language, like football inside an organization, we can find ourselves misaligned. How do you help people get more comfortable with asking questions to validate understanding, rather than simply nodding their head and saying, yeah, that makes sense?
I think it depends on the leader. and you can't always change people, but I like to think of us in a team situation as trying to solve a problem. And it doesn't really matter if my title is X levels above yours, yours is Y level above mine. We have a particular problem. We're all being paid to solve the problem. We should leave this meeting closer to having the problem solved and working on it in that way. I also do believe, we're hiring very smart professional individuals. You should have smart professional blunt conversations. People can smell BS a mile away these days. We're all smart, right? So if something doesn't smell right, let's just say it. We need to do something, even though it doesn't smell right. We'll understand that going in. How do we best get out of this mess? Working together to solve that. I consistently borrow this line from a vendor that I've worked with. It's okay to let my team slip on a banana peel to learn a lesson. It's not okay to have them jump off a cliff. So, giving them also the leeway to make those mistakes to grow stronger while trying to solve the problems, and not having the ramifications of that being, you did a poor job, or I'm upset, or I'm going to give you, an issue on your performance report. It's a learning aspect, so you have to be able to work together. I also want to tie that back into you talking about, why are people the problem there? Think about manufacturing or production of goods. People on a line, they're doing the same exact thing. There's a very well scripted step of doing things. They don't have these issues because everyone knows their job. Everyone knows what they need to do. They got to produce 1,000,000 hamburgers this month. They're producing 1,000,000 hamburgers. They all know their step. Thing of buying from Amazon is very predictable. You buy, you receive, you return, you're done. Maybe there's some other sites that make it less predictable. So it's all about the predictability, knowing what you're doing, being repetitive. And that's the same thing in SaaS businesses. You might have two products that are very high quality. One might make it harder for me to buy from them. I might just go with your competitor because honestly, they didn't make me upset in the buying process. A common reply here today, Mike.
It's a number of the things that we're talking about are just so simple to say. And there are a lot of people who are listening or watching and they're saying, yeah, this all makes sense, but like, how do I do this? So if you're struggling inside an organization with any of the questions that or topics that have come up, actually, Joe, I'll ask you the question. If someone's struggling inside their organization with any of the questions or topics that have come up, where should they go first in their company?
I think if I can, before they go through their company, examples, podcasts like this, communities, resources, there's no reason an educated person these days with an interconnection cannot arm themselves with enough material to go into the company with their request and back it up with evidence, facts, a solution, and next steps. Once they have that, then, typically their manager or the department in charge or whatever executive it happens to be. But we have to get away from saying, this process doesn't work. I don't like it. Stop. To this process may not be the most effective for us, but I've been giving it some thought. And I think if we make the following changes, we could probably get there together. That's going to be received a whole different way. No one wants to hear a complaint. They receive it softer if you follow something that may not be working right, but we have a path to fix it. So you have to go that extra step, and the resources are there. They can just listen to your podcast.
Well, I think, yeah, and to build on that, I think just going in there and asking questions, like go in there, not with hard statements or a point of view. Now, have a point of view that informs the questions that you ask, but ask questions with a genuine curiosity and seeking to understand why things happen the way that they happen, not with the idea of, hey, I have a better way for us to do it, because you may not have all the context. You may not understand all of the different layers that have kind of gotten us to the point that we're at.
Yes, and I think that's when I equate operations teams to legal teams at some point. And owning both, I always see that challenge. Oftentimes individuals in those roles can just immediately say, no, that's not going to work. There's an issue, which is often received as a department of conflict, of no one wants to be aligned or no one wants to be assistive and friendly. You do have to take the extra step to say, we might have some challenges if we go that way because of the following reasons. Or as you're saying, perhaps I don't understand why you're doing that. What is the reason you think that is correct? Or what is the reason you're doing that? Or what is the result you're trying to get to? And when you come from that position of learning together, the no is much more softly received. For example, someone might not be a fan of, let's say, MFA and SSO on apps, right? They may not be a
Yep.
fan of rolling it out or paying the extra fee to allow that to be in the vendor. But you might turn around and say, if you do that, your ISO and your SOC 2 are going to go a lot easier. You're going to save a lot of time in auditing at X per hour per head for auditing and reporting and evidence and stuff. Yeah, you just saved about the amount of the SSO integration. It's a whole different conversation at that point.
Whole different conversation when you ask questions and understand what is it that's important to the person on the other end. What do they value? Why do they value those things? What are they trying to solve for? If we focus on questions related to solving for specific problems and then listen to the answer before we start reacting, listen, heck, take your covey, seek first to understand and then to be understood. Let's gather information, and then we'll be in a better position to have better conversations with folks. So, Joe, we've talked about a lot of stuff, and depending on size of organization, we're going to have a number of different pieces here. We're going to have a lot of information, a lot of data. We're going to have a lot of people. We might even have a lot of systems to kind of go through. How do you reconcile, or how are you seeing people reconcile with all of this more stuff and making it at least simpler to access?
It's a challenge. I mean, if you look at it, I've done another podcast a few months ago where I had stated that we've purchased around 170 SaaS apps for one company, which I was told is quite a large number. We are creating more apps every single day. Just think about your MarkTech stack, right? I have a faster way to do this. Buy our app. And in some cases, we're saving time. There's actual physical headcount being saved, and they can be more productive with that application. But we also have application fatigue. How do people manage that? How do people know what to do? How do they know which one to look at? Even look at any single role. Which red dot on my laptop do I pay attention to? Is it my task management program? Is it my phone? Is it my Slack or my Teams? Is it my email? There's so many things to look at. On the other end of the coin, we are also creating tons of assets every single day, right? We're creating, documents, pieces, the whole knowledge management, challenge that we all have. Where does this stuff go? How do I know that I just created this data sheet for a product that it doesn't exist already? That Prakash from our other team on engineering happened to create it, and he already has it there. How do I know that? So if the organization, the responsibility of the organization has not thought of the way all those things collaborate from a knowledge point of view, I think we are wasting a significant amount of time between the team, right? So we've created communication platforms. You have a video channel, you have email, you have Slack. We've created financial channels. We make sure you have expense management, that your bills get paid, all kind of stuff. But it's often like an afterthought to create a knowledge methodology within a company, right? A place to hold knowledge and to show only one singular version of the truth that can be shared amongst the organization. So if you don't have that, think of it this way. Every time an individual needs to find something, what is the quantity of time it takes them to understand who to ask, where to go? Is it the latest version? Take the average hourly rate, fully weighted. That's your wasted cost. Then if they create it again, now you've multiplied the number of assets. You also have drift in knowledge. You can have different pieces of information going out. Perhaps there's legal or compliance complications to that. What's the cost of that? So if you take, a 200-300 person organization, or you scale it to 1,000, 5,000, every single time someone has to question, where is information? Is it the latest? And how do I access it? All those times add up to raw money that's wasted.
Are you optimistic about some of the tools that are leveraging AI to help solve this challenge, or are you more pessimistic or skeptical about what the real capabilities are? So like, how do you think about, and the reason I ask the question is a lot of times the data that we're talking about here is unstructured data. Like there's some structure to it in some of the best practices and those kind of things. You can kind of organize around policy procedure type things. But when you get into a lot of the unstructured data, are you optimistic that where we're going with some of the AI tools that we might be able to help solve some of this, or still a bit skeptical on that?
Honestly, I'm optimistic, but I might provide a negative flair to it. So again, the
Cool.
whole ops side. So I apologize in advance. I think the tooling can assist. I think it could facilitate a faster answer or connectivity between pieces of information of knowledge that may not have been immediately picked up by a human, but it's not a platform by itself. People, process, technology. If the people don't insert the stuff into the platform to begin with, and they don't maintain it, and they don't give it the love it needs, and they don't nurture it, the best AI in the world will not be able to solve your problem. So you can have this fantastic technology and you have the smartest AI in it, but the people have to all buy into it. They have to live by it. They have to breathe by it. They have to nurture it. And then if you bring those things together, then sure, I am incredibly optimistic.
There is a role that has existed for a long period of time, even before a number of these technologies came out. And it's a role that exists in a museum. It's a role that exists in a library. There's a curator of content or a curator of information. If you do not have a curator inside your organization, you are missing out on an opportunity to address the challenge that Joe has just described. And that the curator can help solve a lot of things. We don't need to continue to keep creating, and we'll continue to create. But if we don't have a curator inside pruning information, getting rid of some of these things, like how many times from a legal perspective have you seen people use old language in new contracts?
Luckily, we keep a very good handle on that, but I have seen that in the past, and I have seen that in other cases. The lack, if you want to take a tagline from that, the lack of a curator, I think exponentially increases the quantity of tribal knowledge. And then when someone walks out the door, which will eventually happen, it's a at-will hiring for all companies, right? That tribal knowledge is lost forever. So what's the cost to your business of losing that key information?
That is an awesome question to end the podcast on. What is the cost of loss of that information? Joe, where can people find out more about what you're working on or connect with you directly?
Yeah, at the moment, LinkedIn would be the best. Feel free to reach out to me. Happy to, continue the conversation and connect with others.
We'll include links in the show notes as we usually do. Joe, awesome conversation. Thanks for joining me today. If you know of someone who would enjoy this conversation, get value out of the conversation, please share it with them. Let Joe and I know, both of us know via LinkedIn. We like seeing those shares. It helps spread the word of the podcast. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?